I'm Keanu Reeves. I thought I'd left the shadows behind when I hung up my badge as a private investigator. I wanted a quiet life, teaching self-defense at a community center in Seattle, helping kids find their footing instead of chasing criminals in the dead of night. But some evils refused to stay buried. When a whistleblower named Emily Tanaka vanished after digging too deep into a powerful corporation, my past came roaring back with a vengeance. Now ruthless enforcers and corrupt executives threaten everything I hold dear. I can't walk away, not when innocent lives are on the line. This time, the shadows came looking for me. And if they think I'll run, they have no idea what I'm capable of. Keanu Reeves stood at the far end of the worn-out basketball court, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering with a faint hum. It was nearly evening at the North Greenwood Community Center in Seattle, and the winter sky outside had turned a deep shade of navy. Though the building showed its age, cracks in the concrete walls, creaking floorboards in the hallways, Keanu found comfort in the place. Here, in this modest hub of activity, he saw the best of humanity: teenagers eager to learn, volunteers devoting their free time, and a sense of optimism struggling to stay afloat despite limited funds. Over the past 2 years, this center had become his sanctuary from a past he was trying to leave behind. As he watched the group of underprivileged youth gear up for his self-defense class, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on the path that led him here. Once a sought-after private investigator known for his cunning and calm demeanor under pressure, he had walked away from that life after a harrowing case shook him to the core. He never went into detail about it, not to the staff, not to the teens he mentored, not even to the handful of friends who had stuck around. All they knew was that he had retired with an air of quiet finality. Volunteering his time teaching martial arts was as close as he allowed himself to come to any form of investigation. It was a controlled, disciplined skill he could still share, minus the lurking dangers of his old profession. He motioned for the students to gather in a semicircle around him. "Okay," he began, voice resonating in the quiet gym. "Today, we're focusing on situational awareness." He demonstrated a simple technique: how to keep one's center of gravity low and balanced while scanning for threats. Many of these teenagers faced harsh realities outside the center's protective walls: unstable home lives, gang activity, and financial insecurity. Teaching them self-defense wasn't just about throwing a punch, it was about building the confidence and resilience they needed to navigate a challenging world. A tall 16-year-old named Jamal stepped forward to spar with Keanu. Despite Jamal's lanky build and some nervous jitters, he had a sharp mind and a knack for picking up new skills. With each movement, every duck, weave, and block, Keanu saw glimmers of the boy's potential. Jamal had confided in him recently that he was dabbling with coding and tech, trying to learn any skill that might keep him off the streets. Keanu admired that spark of determination. Just as class was winding down, Francesca, the center's program director, entered the gym. Her face showed concern, and she was wringing her hands as she approached. "Keanu," she said in a low tone, "there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Keanu raised an eyebrow. Visitors were rare for him, especially unannounced ones claiming urgent matters. He ended class and asked the group to cool down by stretching, promising to be back shortly. After grabbing a towel and tossing it around his neck, he followed Francesca into the hallway. She led him to a small office where a man sat hunched over a battered briefcase. "Mark Tanaka?" Keanu said, recognizing the figure from many years past. Mark was an accountant who had once supplied Keanu with crucial financial leads on a case. They had kept in sporadic touch, but Keanu hadn't seen him in over a year. The deep lines on Mark's face and the anxious shift in his eyes made it clear something was very wrong. Mark stood, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "Keanu, I'm sorry to show up like this. I tried your old phone number, your email. I couldn't reach you any other way." Keanu nodded. "I haven't exactly been easy to find." He gestured for Mark to sit back down. "So what's going on?" Mark swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "It's Emily. She's missing." He fidgeted with the edges of the briefcase. "You remember my sister, right? She's a research analyst. She's been investigating a big corporation called Ardent Systems. Apparently, she found serious evidence of wrongdoing, embezzlement, poor working conditions, bribes to local officials. She wouldn't stop digging, even after she started getting threats. He exhaled shakily. And then a week ago, she vanished. Keanu's stomach tightened. The name, Ardent Systems, tugged at a faint memory, rumors of unethical practices, maybe some hush-hush lawsuits, but nothing concrete. You've gone to the police, right? Mark nodded. They haven't found anything conclusive. And the detectives don't seem very motivated to dig deeper. They think she left on her own or something. Nobody's taking her disappearance seriously. He tapped the briefcase. Emily trusted me with copies of some documents, but they're hard to parse. Financials, coded references, it's way out of my league. I'm desperate, Keanu. You're the only person who might be able to make sense of it. A flash of dread and familiarity swept through Keanu. How many times had he seen that look in a client's eyes, fear of the unknown, a plea for help when all other avenues felt exhausted? He'd vowed to leave the PI life behind, but as Mark spoke, Keanu could feel a sense of duty stirring inside him. Francesca poked her head into the office, concern written across her features. Mark's anxious demeanor had not gone unnoticed. Is everything okay? She asked. Keanu offered a tight smile. It's a personal matter. We'll be all right. He waited for her to leave before turning his attention back to Mark. Why me? Mark's voice trembled with equal parts hope and desperation. Because you're the best I know. Emily always said so, too. She admired your sense of justice, your methodical approach. If anyone can find her, it's you. Keanu leaned back, the squeaking office chair breaking the silence. Memories of his last investigation, of endless sleepless nights, of moral dilemmas and near escapes, flickered through his mind. He glanced toward the door, where he could just make out the muffled chatter of teenagers still cooling down in the gym. This place was supposed to be his refuge, where he could start over, focusing on teaching self-defense to kids rather than chasing down dangerous truths. But how could he ignore a friend's plea? How could he let Mark's sister remain missing while a powerful corporation might be tightening its noose around her secrets? He inhaled deeply, feeling that old fire spark again in his chest. That sense of responsibility, of needing to stand up for the vulnerable, refused to be extinguished. All right, Keanu said softly. I'll do what I can. Relief washed over Mark's face, and he thrust the briefcase forward. Thank you. You have no idea, this means everything. Keanu stood and placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. Let's start with those documents, see what we can find. But Mark, he added, his tone grave, once we go down this road, there's no turning back. Ardent Systems doesn't sound like they'll let us snoop around without a fight. Mark swallowed and nodded. I understand. Emily's worth it. As they left the small office and moved back into the well-lit hallway, Keanu realized that his quiet life, the life he had so carefully constructed around simple acts of service and small kindnesses, was about to change. The fight he had been avoiding was coming for him, whether he wanted it or not. And for the sake of Mark, Emily, and anyone else caught in Ardent Systems' net, Keanu Reeves was about to dust off his old skills and step once more into the shadows, where every decision carried consequences far greater than he could predict. Keanu Reeves sat at a small wooden desk in a cramped back room of the North Greenwood Community Center, poring over the stack of documents Mark Tanaka had handed him the previous night. Faint chatter from the nearby gym drifted in, kids shooting hoops, volunteers tidying up, and the distant thump of a closing locker. While the center's energy usually calmed him, now it only heightened his sense that everything was about to shift. He sifted through Emily Tanaka's meticulous notes, spreadsheets detailing suspicious transfers, memos from Ardent Systems board meetings, and cryptic references to environmental reports. It was clear she'd methodically collected a mountain of evidence. But the more Keanu read, the more he realized he was looking at only fragments of a larger puzzle. The hush money, bribery allegations, and code names for officials, someone with power was orchestrating it all. And that someone appeared to be Ardent's CEO, Philip Grayson. A light knock on the door broke his concentration. Francesca peered inside, her brow furrowed. "Can I come in?" "Yeah," Keanu replied, clearing a space for her. He could tell from her expression that she wasn't bearing good news. Francesca sat down, exhaling slowly. "I just got off the phone with one of our major donors. They're pulling out, no explanation, just that they can't fund us anymore. This is big, Keanu. We might have to cut some after-school programs if we don't replace that money soon." Keanu leaned back in his chair, uneasy. The timing seemed more than coincidence. "You think it's connected to Ardent?" She offered a half-shrug. "I can't say for sure, but I've heard rumors. Corporations like Ardent donate all the time to nonprofits, and sometimes they use that as leverage. If we stand against them..." She shook her head, letting the implication hang in the air. "I just don't want the kids to suffer." Nodding thoughtfully, Keanu tapped the edge of a document. "I get it. Let me look into something, okay? We'll figure this out." He didn't want to alarm Francesca further, but his gut told him Ardent wasn't merely lurking in financial ledgers. They had a grip on local institutions, and that grip was tightening. Once she left, Keanu couldn't shake a nagging feeling that he needed an expert in investigative journalism to help interpret Emily's data. The name Sophia Kane surfaced in his mind. Emily's journal mentioned multiple attempts to pass on leads to her. From what Keanu had heard, Sophia was dogged, fearless, and at times reckless, precisely the kind of journalist corporations like Ardent despised. If Emily had tried to connect with her, maybe Sophia had the missing pieces he needed. He spent the morning calling in a few favors from old contacts, carefully avoiding any direct mention of Emily or Ardent. Finally, one lead paid off. A friend of a friend provided a cell phone number for Sophia. It was a risk to reach out, but time was of the essence. He dialed, unsure if she'd even pick up. A curt voice answered. "Sophia Kane." "Ms. Kane," Keanu began quietly. "My name is Keanu Reeves. I'm looking into Ardent Systems. I have some documents from Emily Tanaka." The line went dead for a second, as if she muted herself to gather composure. When she returned, her tone was clipped, defensive. "How do you know about Emily?" Keanu explained how Mark Tanaka had come to him for help, how Emily had vanished. He mentioned the array of data she'd compiled. "I think you might be able to help make sense of it. In return, I'll share anything I find. I just want to find Emily." Her sigh crackled through the phone. "I've heard she disappeared. Look, I'm trying to publish a story on Ardent's corruption, but my editor's breathing down my neck about lawsuits. And I'm already on thin ice financially." She paused, weighing her next words. "But if you have real proof, maybe we can work something out." They agreed to meet that afternoon at a cafe far from downtown, somewhere out of Ardent's likely surveillance zone. Before heading off, Keanu rechecked the documents in the battered briefcase Mark had left with him. Unease coiled in his stomach, accounts labeled "Special Projects," sudden spikes in local political donations, and references to contractors, and excess materials. It read like a ledger of shady dealings, yet the pattern was elusive. Emily's encrypted files might hold the key, but how to access them? Outside, cold Seattle drizzle greeted Keanu. He pulled up his hood and walked briskly to his motorcycle. The ride across town gave him space to think. His mind raced. What if Emily had dug too deep? Had she discovered not just typical corporate malfeasance but something more sinister? Human trafficking, major environmental crimes, or even black market deals? Ardent's tentacles seemed to reach into every corner, from local government to philanthropic contributions. And now, possibly, the community center's own funding was at risk. Arriving at the nondescript cafe, Keanu scanned the interior before entering. A handful of patrons sipped coffee and tapped away on laptops. Near the back window sat a woman in her late 20s with short, dark hair. She eyed him cautiously. In her posture, Keanu recognized the same wariness he often carried in his past life, a person used to being watched. "You Keanu?" she asked quietly. He nodded, sliding into the chair across from her. "Sophia, I presume." Without any small talk, she flipped open a battered folder. Inside were news clippings, notes, and photocopied emails from anonymous sources. She glanced around, then leaned forward. "I've been collecting intel on Arden for months," she said. "Bribery, paying off local officials, exploiting workers, nothing shocking for a massive corporation. But about 3 weeks ago, Emily hinted there was a smoking gun. Something that could bring down the entire system if it went public. Then, before she could share more, she vanished." Keanu showed her a few of Emily's documents, pointing to peculiar financial transactions. Sophia's eyes widened as she connected them to her own leads, mentions of a certain Councilman Bridges, hush money doled out to small towns, and questionable safety certifications. She exhaled sharply. "So it's bigger than I thought." Leaning in, Keanu lowered his voice. "We can't do this alone, and we have to be careful. I've got a feeling Arden has eyes and ears all over Seattle. People at the community center are already feeling the pressure." Sophia nodded, tapping her pen anxiously on the table. "I'm not one to back down, but this is the sort of story that ruins careers and lives if we're not smart. My editor is already terrified of a lawsuit. If we don't come with ironclad evidence, they'll bury it." Keanu rubbed his temples, the weight of the investigation pressing heavily on him. "Then let's get ironclad. The encrypted files Emily left behind might be our best bet. We just need to figure out how to crack them without tipping off Arden." Sophia looked at him with a wry grin. "We've got a tall order ahead of us." As they planned their next steps, Keanu couldn't help recalling the promise he had made to Mark, that he would do whatever it took to find Emily. Already he felt the web of corporate influence closing in, strands of corruption linking everything from politics to his beloved community center. A quiet life of volunteer work was no longer an option. Arden had forced his hand, and with Sophia by his side, even if warily at first, he was determined to unravel the corporation's secrets and bring Emily home safely. For now, the cafe's hum of espresso machines and the hiss of steaming milk formed a small cocoon of temporary safety. Soon enough, though, they would have to step back into the larger world of backroom deals, hidden alliances, and a multinational corporation that would go to any length to protect its profits. And in that fight, there would be no guarantees, only the relentless search for truth and the hope that somewhere within Arden's labyrinth, Emily was still alive, waiting for rescue. Keanu Reeves eased open the roll-up door of the storage unit, a dull metallic clatter echoing through the cavernous facility. Pale overhead lights cast flickering shadows on the concrete floor. He glanced over his shoulder, a habit of caution creeping back into him from years of investigative work. This was the last known location Emily Tanaka had accessed before her disappearance, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone else might be watching. He stepped inside, setting down the heavy bolt cutter he'd used to snap the padlock. Almost immediately, the sharp smell of dust and stale air assaulted his nose. Dim beams of light filtered through slivers in the door, revealing cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. Plastic tubs and duffel bags were piled haphazardly in the corner. His eyes fell on a small folding desk draped with a stained tablecloth, a half-empty coffee cup still resting on it. How long ago had Emily been here? Days? Weeks? After a moment of hesitation, Keanu flicked on a flashlight and swept it across the interior. He spotted a corkboard propped against the back wall, dotted with newspaper clippings and scribbled notes. Approaching it, he realized it was a visual map of Arden Systems' corporate structure. Photographs of executives were pinned in place, some lines connecting them to local politicians. In the corner, a torn page read, "Grayson, CEO. Shell accounts? Overseas ties?" The question marks alone hinted that Emily had been on the verge of discovering something explosive. Yet the real treasure here was probably digital. Keanu kneeled by a plastic crate labeled Research and pulled it open. Inside, he discovered files in neat manila folders, each marked with a code he didn't immediately recognize. He thumbed through them, spotting references to worker safety reports, investment portfolios, and scattered mentions of bribe payments. But he couldn't piece them all together. Perhaps Emily intended to cross-reference these with something else, like the encrypted flash drive she'd supposedly been working on. A flash of silver caught his eye. There, near the back of the crate, was a small USB stick taped beneath the lid. He carefully pried it loose, his heart thumping. This had to be the flash drive Sophia Kane had mentioned, the one containing encrypted data Emily was trying to decrypt. Keanu tucked it into his jacket pocket for safekeeping. He continued to search the unit, shining his flashlight under tarps and into boxes. At last, in a battered suitcase, he found a spiral-bound journal. The front page bore Emily's handwritten note. "If something happens to me, let this be a record." It struck him like a punch to the gut. She must have sensed danger closing in. He flipped through the first few pages, scanning cryptic references to Ardent's budget shortfalls, unapproved chemical dumps, and questionable security contractors. The sense of dread he'd been harboring deepened. This was no run-of-the-mill corporate mischief. It was an entire blueprint of corruption, and Emily had been on the verge of exposing it all. Suddenly, a soft scuff of footsteps made him freeze. He turned off the flashlight, heart pounding. In the silence, he could hear muffled voices outside the storage unit. The sound of hurried footfalls told him someone was approaching, possibly more than one person. His mind raced. Had Arden already tracked him here? How? Keanu slipped behind a row of boxes, listening as the metal door rattled from the outside. There was a clang as it began rolling up. A trio of men, dressed in black tactical gear, stepped into the glow of a cell phone flashlight. One of them held a pistol at his side. "Check the back," the gunman ordered. "Boss wants us to grab everything and destroy what we can't carry." Keanu cursed under his breath. If these men got the evidence, Emily's work would vanish. Carefully sliding the journal into his satchel, he prepared himself for a confrontation he wished he could avoid. The first thug, a stocky figure with a shaved head, moved deeper into the unit, scanning the darkness with a narrow beam of light. Keanu waited until the man was only a few feet away, then lunged, grabbing the thug's wrist. With a swift twist, he disarmed him. The gun clattered to the floor as the man let out a startled yelp. Two more men rushed forward, flashlights dancing wildly. Keanu ducked a punch, pivoted, and delivered a well-placed strike to the second assailant's abdomen. The third man swung a heavy flashlight like a club. Keanu narrowly blocked it with his forearm, pain radiating up to his shoulder. Despite the close quarters, he moved with precision, years of martial arts discipline guiding him. One foe stumbled against a pile of crates, toppling them, sending paper files cascading across the floor. Another regained his balance, charging in again. Keanu sidestepped, hooking the attacker's leg and sending him crashing onto the concrete. In the confusion, a crate rolled, knocking the cell phone flashlight out of the thug's hand. Darkness enveloped the scene, broken only by faint light from the hallway. "Grab that journal!" the stocky man hissed, clambering for a flashlight. Keanu realized they knew exactly what they were after. He needed to leave. Gathering his satchel, he sprinted for the door. One of the men blocked his path, brandishing a knife now. Keanu braced himself, mentally rehearsing his options. When the man lunged, Keanu used a wrist lock technique to disarm him, sending the blade skittering across the concrete. Panicked and disoriented, the men were in each other's way, desperate to secure evidence for their boss. Seizing the opportunity, Keanu dashed past them into the open corridor. Their shouts followed him as he fled, echoing off the concrete walls. He glanced behind once, ensuring they weren't immediately on his heels. It appeared he'd gained a small lead. He raced down the hallway, past row after row of identical storage units. Adrenaline coursed through him, and he fought the urge to look back again. Reaching his motorcycle outside, he revved the engine and sped away, the scent of rubber lingering as he peeled out of the parking lot. Only when he was several blocks away did he allow himself to breathe. At a red light, he pulled over under a lone street lamp, the engine idling. He checked his satchel. The journal was intact, and the flash drive was still in his jacket pocket. Blood trickled down his forearm from a minor scratch, likely from the scuffle with the knife. Adrenaline still buzzed through his veins, and he forced himself to calm down, inhaling slowly, exhaling deliberately. All around him, the city carried on as though nothing unusual had happened. Cars passed, oblivious to the confrontation that had just taken place. Pedestrians wandered in and out of convenience stores. Keanu found the contrast jarring. Here he was, holding the key to a massive corporate scandal, possibly the only remaining fragments of Emily's work. He felt a swell of determination. He couldn't let her disappear into the night, just another casualty of a sprawling corporate machine. He accelerated into the darkness, making his way back toward the community center. Sophia would need to see what he'd recovered. She might be able to decrypt the flash drive or glean valuable insights from Emily's journal. They'd have to move fast. Those thugs had come prepared, and they would undoubtedly report back to their employer, leaving Keanu and Sophia with only a narrow window to act before Ardent Systems made another move. As he navigated the city streets, Keanu's mind churned with possibilities. The puzzle pieces were piling up. Now, he thought grimly, it was a race against time to see who could put them together first, himself and Sophia, or the ruthless powers behind Ardent Systems. Either way, he was in too deep to turn back. And if Emily was still out there, he had to believe she was counting on him to finish what she had started. Keanu Reeves stood in the bustling lobby of a modest newspaper office, the din of phones ringing and conversations echoing off the drab walls. The space smelled faintly of ink and burnt coffee, a scent familiar to him from countless visits to similar offices in his old investigative days. Except now, the stakes felt higher, the tension humming beneath every exchange he overheard. He'd come here at Sophia Kane's request, but his grip on the satchel containing Emily's journal and the precious flash drive remained tight, as if he expected someone to snatch them from his hands at any second. A young, overworked receptionist behind the desk glanced up. "Can I help you?" Before Keanu could answer, Sophia stepped out from a hallway, her short, dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She motioned him over. "It's fine, Jesse, he's with me," she told the receptionist. "We have to talk somewhere private," Sophia said in a hushed tone, leading him to a small, cluttered office in the back. Empty coffee cups and loose papers littered the desk. A single window looked out onto a narrow alley. Sophia closed the door, threw a glance at it, then leaned in close to Keanu, her voice a near whisper. "Ardent Systems has connections here. Some of the editors might not be on our side. I don't trust anyone but my direct team." Keanu nodded. He understood how easily corporate influence could infiltrate even the most ostensibly independent outlets. Settling into a rickety chair, he handed over Emily's journal and the flash drive. "I found these in Emily's storage unit. Ardent goons showed up. We barely made it out." She examined the journal first, eyes darting over the scribbled notes and diagrams. The encryption on the flash drive, however, was trickier. "Okay, so it looks like Emily was onto something about Ardent's offshore accounts. She's got pages marked with flagged transactions and coded references I can't parse yet." Sophia tapped her pen against her lip, thinking. "The flash drive might have the missing puzzle pieces, but it's definitely encrypted beyond my basic skills. I know a guy who could possibly crack it," Keanu offered. "But I don't want too many people involved until we know what we're dealing with. Might put them in danger." Sophia scanned the hallway through the tiny office window, double-checking that no one was eavesdropping. "I've got some contacts too, white-hat hackers who owe me favors. Before we decide on that, let's see if there's another way." She closed Emily's journal, then looked Keanu square in the eyes. "Look, I'm putting everything on the line here. You might have heard I'm in hot water with my editor. If I can't deliver a solid story soon, I'm out. But more than that, it's about exposing Ardent for what it is." He nodded. "I get it. Emily was trying to do the same. And now she's missing." A flicker of sympathy crossed Sophia's face, softening her usual guarded expression. "Emily sent me encrypted emails, clues about toxic dumping, falsified reports, collusion with certain politicians. But she never got the chance to give me the full context. I'm guessing this journal and the flash drive fill in the gaps." Before either of them could speak further, Sophia's phone buzzed on her desk. She picked it up, frowning at the screen. "Speak of the devil," She muttered, then turned the device so Keanu could see the text. It read, "Don't trust your new friend. This goes deeper than you think. Stop digging." An unlisted number. Keanu's jaw tightened. They're onto us already. Or at least onto you. She huffed a humorless laugh. This kind of intimidation is standard procedure for Ardent. But the timing suggests they know we've teamed up. They're trying to get under our skin. He couldn't help thinking back to the fight in the storage unit, the men rummaging for Emily's evidence, how desperate they were to silence the truth. We need to be careful, he said, voice low. They've got connections everywhere. One misstep, and they'll shut us down, or worse. Sophia nodded, her gaze hardening. That's why I called you here. I wasn't sure if I could trust you at first, but Emily's brother swears by you. Then there's the fact that you escaped Ardent's thugs without seriously hurting anyone. That says something about your methods. Keanu shrugged slightly. I try not to leave broken bones behind unless I have to. Silence settled between them, thick with the unspoken acknowledgement that this alliance was fragile. They might each have pieces the other needed, but it didn't guarantee complete trust. Sophia was a journalist walking a precarious line between truth-telling and corporate retaliation. Keanu was a former private investigator unwillingly dragged back into a dangerous game. Their motives might align, but their approaches could clash. Finally, Sophia cleared her throat. We need to move fast. I'll scan the journal pages and start cross-referencing them with what I have. Meanwhile, see if you can get that flash drive decrypted. We'll compare notes. She typed a few instructions on her phone, sending them to a colleague to prep encrypted cloud storage, just in case they had to flee and needed off-site backups. Keanu rose from the chair, glancing once more at the window looking onto the alley. Just don't store it anywhere obvious. No standard file sharing. If Ardent's got corporate spies, it won't take them long to sniff out your usual channels. Believe me, I know, Sophia said grimly, gathering the scattered papers into a neat pile. She paused, then looked up at him. By the way, thanks. Not many people would risk this kind of heat just because someone asked. His face tightened with memory. I owe it to Mark and Emily. And to myself, if I'm being honest. I've seen too many people get crushed by corporations like Ardent. Sophia looked at him for a moment, as though trying to read the lines of regret and resolve etched into his features. Let's just make sure we don't get crushed in the process. They walked back into a hallway, the ambient noise of phone calls and clacking keyboards washing over them again. Though they still had a long way to go, encrypted files to break, hidden connections to unravel, there was a small, unspoken understanding that they would need each other's strengths to survive what lay ahead. Even if trust hadn't bloomed fully, necessity had forged an uneasy partnership. As Keanu headed for the exit, he couldn't help noticing the watchful eyes of a coworker, or maybe a curious passerby, trailing him. Ardent's network might be vast, but if Emily's clues were as damning as they seemed, all the money and power in the world might not be enough to keep the truth buried. The question was whether they could bring it to light before Ardent's machine closed in on them completely. One step at a time, he told himself. He couldn't save Emily alone. He needed Sophia's contacts and journalistic reach. The flash drive burned like a secret in his pocket, a reminder that the storm they were stirring would only get more volatile. But in the stillness of the corridor, he felt that old spark of resolve. This fight wasn't just about Emily Tanaka anymore. It was about everyone Ardent had endangered, and everyone who had been too scared to speak up. Together, no matter how fragile their alliance, they had a chance. And sometimes, Keanu reflected, a chance was all you needed to topple even the mightiest corporate giant. The drive south out of Seattle took Keanu Reeves and Sophia Kane through miles of suburban sprawl and into the rolling farmland beyond. A canopy of thick, slate-gray clouds hung overhead, threatening rain. For much of the ride, they exchanged minimal conversation, Keanu behind the wheel, Sophia tapping notes on her phone. Each was lost in thought, wrestling with what they had uncovered about Ardent's systems. Every so often, Sophia would peer down at Emily's journal, cross-referencing the notes with documents on her tablet. Their destination, a small factory town tucked away from major highways. Emily's journal had repeatedly mentioned the place, particularly its outdated safety standards and suspicions of unreported industrial accidents. If any community embodied the dark heart of Arden's negligence, this was it. They arrived around midday, greeted by rusted metal signs and worn asphalt streets. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, hinting at the factory's primary operation. Keanu found a narrow side street to park on, cutting the engine. As they stepped out, the wind carried a faint chemical tang, stinging his nostrils. Emily documented at least 2 major incidents here, Sophia said, scrolling through her notes. One was a fire that gutted part of the plant. The other was an explosion, never made it to the mainstream news. Arden paid off local officials to hush it up. She glanced around at the row of rundown homes. If there was an explosion, I can't imagine it went unnoticed by the people living this close. Keanu nodded grimly. Then we talked to the locals. They found Maria Vasquez waiting on the porch of a small bungalow at the end of the street. Through a contact at a local church, they had arranged to speak with her about her late husband, Carlos, one of the victims of the alleged factory explosion. The house had peeling paint, and the yard was overgrown, signs of a family struggling to cope. Maria appeared in her early 40s, her eyes carrying the weight of grief that time had not managed to dissipate. She greeted Keanu and Sophia with a polite nod, ushering them inside. The living room was modest but neatly kept, the walls adorned with photos of a smiling man, Carlos, and a young girl with dark curls. I appreciate you both coming, Maria began softly, gesturing for them to sit on a well-worn couch. Not many people want to talk about what happened. Arden has powerful friends in this town. Keanu leaned forward. We understand. I'm sorry for your loss. We just want to uncover the truth about the explosion and help hold Arden accountable. Maria's gaze flickered to a photo of her husband perched on a small end table. He was a safety officer at the plant, always worried about the outdated machinery and the shortcuts management would take. One night, he came home and told me that if something didn't change, a disaster was inevitable. Sophia pulled out a notepad. Emily Tanaka mentioned Carlos in her journal. She wrote that he'd reported concerns to a company hotline. He did, Maria confirmed. But nothing changed. And then, just like he predicted, an explosion tore through part of the factory. 3 people died, including Carlos. Her voice wavered. Arden's people swooped in immediately. They blamed the workers, saying someone wasn't following protocol. They handed out hush money to the widows, promised us legal settlements if we signed non-disclosure agreements. She exhaled heavily. I never signed. Sophia jotted down notes. You refused their settlement? Maria nodded. I wanted justice, not hush money. But Arden has a legal team that buries people like me. Eventually, I realized I couldn't fight them alone. Tears welled up in her eyes. Emily was the only person who listened to me. She came here, recorded my testimony, took copies of safety reports my husband had hidden away. Keanu noticed a small stack of envelopes on the coffee table, all bearing past due stamps. Bills were piling up. The financial strain was palpable. Maria, do you still have any of those safety reports? He asked gently. She pressed her lips together. I turned most of them over to Emily, but I kept a few scanned copies for my records. They're on a thumb drive in my room. You can have them. Sophia exchanged a glance with Keanu. This might provide another clue for decrypting Emily's main flash drive. We'd appreciate that, Sophia said.